Welcome back to part 2 of our continuing series on economics. Since economists and the Federal Reserve share in their confusion as to what money is, we ought to at least try to define the term. Money will give 3 definitions too as well. Number 1, Ludwig von Mises, an Austrian economist, had defined money as the most vendible commodity. Merrill Jenkins of St. Louis had defined money as wealth received in lieu of wealth desired. And thirdly, most everyone defines money as anything being used as a medium of exchange, to which I would add that it ought to be or must be in direct proportion to its declared quantity. Money is an abstract term. You cannot see, smell, hear, taste, and touch a money. But you could use something as money. For example, if I were to pass this ballpoint pen to the cameraman in exchange for perhaps his belt, most everyone would say that if we have traded, that we have entered into a barter transaction. Being from Maine, I hope I didn't say barter too strangely. In fact, I'm probably the only person that you've come across that doesn't have an accent, so you probably find it fairly easy to understand me. Supposing I were to pass this pen, however, for a belt, and we trade. An even trade is a barter transaction, the parity being 1 for 1. Parity is simply one item expressed in terms of another. Suppose, however, that the cameraman decides that he wants to pass the pen on to another party in exchange for maybe a roll of duct tape. So he passes the pen on in another transaction. The pen, being used in 2 or more transactions, is the intermediate substance of 2 or more transactions. The pen is used as the intermediate substance or the medium of the 2 or more exchanges. The pen is simply used as money. However, you can't use money as money. There's no such thing that is in and of itself a money. What, after all, would be the atomic number or the atomic weight or the color of a money? What's the atomic weight of a money? I don't know. But you could use something as money, and whatever you're using as money is being used as a medium of exchange. In the 1920s, the United States was using, for public purposes at least, gold and silver in coin form as money. What, therefore, was being used as the medium of exchange in the United States in the 1920s? Gold and silver. In the 1800s, gold and silver were being used as the medium of exchange. What, therefore, was being used as money in the United States? Gold and silver. But you cannot use a medium of exchange as money, and you can't use money as a medium of exchange. There seems to be a great deal of confusion about that. In fact, the Federal Reserve puts out a publication called Presenting the Fed. This is a New York Federal Reserve Bank publication. And on page 1, they tell us, quote, "Money provides us with a medium of exchange." End quote. That's not quite so. You can't use money as a medium of exchange, because unless you could identify money per se, that you could see, smell, hear, taste, and touch it, you couldn't use it as anything. But you could use something as money. In economics, principles and applications, 1948 college-level economics textbook, put out by Dodd and Hasek. They tell us pretty much the same thing. Page 183, subtitle, Money as a Medium of Exchange. The most apparent practical use of money is that as a medium of exchange. Really? At the bottom of the page, they tell us about the suitability of gold and silver for use as money. Now we're talking about a tangible substance. 2 of them, in fact. Precious metals, gold and silver. You could use gold and silver as money, but you can't use money as a medium of exchange. There's no such thing as a money. Readings in Money, National Income and Stabilization Policy. College-level text as well. On page 92, Gardner-Ackley again in his article, The Multiplier Time Period, Money, Inventories, and Flexibility. Wow. He asks the question, why is this assumption made? Answer, because money is needed as a medium of exchange and for no other reason. Impossible. You can't use money as a medium of exchange, but you could use cows, salt, fish hooks, gold, silver, and tobacco as a medium of exchange. And if you're using cows, salt, fish hooks, tobacco, gold, and silver as a medium of exchange, you're using all of those as money. In History for Banking in all the leading nations, this is volume 2 of a 4-volume set, published originally in 1896 and reprinted in 1971. We read on page 266 a definition of the word barter. Now, they only use 14 words to define the term, and I think that's probably all that's necessary. Quote, when material products are exchanged directly for material products, the transaction is termed barter. A material product is something that has substance. You can see, smell, hear, taste, and or touch a material product. Credit's a little different story. Nobody's ever seen, smelled, tasted, heard, or touched credit. On page 269, they begin the definition of currency. And things kind of go to pot, because it takes 1,112 words to define currency. It begins on page 269, takes all of page 270, and takes a little bit over half of page 271. No, I'm not going to read it all. Economists are very confused about what currency is. Currency is anything that is currently being used as money. However, economists and the banks for whom they work would like to have us believe that not only is gold and silver suitable for currency use, but that credit could be used as currency. And we'll find out here in a few minutes that that's what we're using in the United States, and all over the world we're using intangible credit. So their definition became abnormally broad, and when it takes 1,112 words to define a term, somebody's out to confuse somebody. Money, or using something as money, to be more precise, is employing indirect barter. If, for example, Paul and I were to trade his belt for my pen, this is a direct barter transaction if what I want is his belt and if what he wants from me is the pen. But if, on the other hand, I were to pay him 1 ounce of silver for the belt, he may not want the silver itself, but he may want to use the silver to acquire something else. So the silver is being used as money, as a medium of exchange. It's being used as indirect barter. Most people, of course, will say, that's what I do with a Federal Reserve note. Well, that's what it appears that we do with Federal Reserve notes. But the Federal Reserve note does not exist in proportion to the number that appears on the Federal Reserve note. One piece of paper can be 100, it can be 5, it can be 1. However, this is only 1 pen, and a 1 ounce piece of silver is only 1 ounce of silver, and we don't stamp the number 20 on it and convert it to 20 ounces of silver. And I think you'll understand that as we go on a little further. So whatever you're going to use as money must exist, and if it exists, it must be tangible, and a tangible is perceptible by one or more of the 5 human senses. You can see it, smell it, taste it, hear it, and or touch it. Therefore, this tangible exists in one state of existence or another. Those of you who have taken chemistry and physics know that there are only 3 states of existence. Something is either a gas, a liquid, or a solid. If it's not a gas, liquid, or a solid, then you're dealing with spiritual concepts only, and you're not dealing with something that has what we'll call materiality. So money per se does not exist because no one has ever seen a money either as a gas, a liquid, or a solid, but you could use something as money. If I look here at the monetary authority of the Federal Reserve, for example, this is a pamphlet put out by the Federal Reserve Board of Governors over there in Malfunction Junction, Washington, D.C., the District of Corruption. And on page 4, they ask the question, what is money? It's a good question. Their answer is rather interesting also. Money is entirely artificial it says. What does artificial mean? Well, I looked it up just to make sure that I had it fairly solid, and artificial is something that is factious, fictitious, synthetic, and imaginary. It's not only imaginary, it's entirely imaginary. Money is entirely artificial. Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Historically, something has been used as money throughout much of our people's history and walk upon this planet. Cows were once used as money. Salt, fish hooks, bricks of tea were used as money by the Chinese, as was opium. Salt has been used as money. Gold and silver have been used as money perhaps longer than any other substances, and it appears that we have prospered more during the use of hard monies than during the use of credit. Cows being used as money pose a few interesting problems. One is, how do you make change for a cow? Supposing Paul here has 4 goats and I have 1 cow, and I say, Paul, I'd like to trade you. And he says, that's fine. I agree to your parity or your exchange ratio that your cow equals 4 of my goats in terms of psychological value. But I don't want to trade you any more than maybe 2 of my goats. Well, if 4 goats equals 1 cow, ergo prompta hoc, therefore 2 goats must equal half a cow. So Paul goes up to the garage and gets himself a great big saw, and he comes over and I said, what are you going to do with that? Well, he said, I'm going to make change. Well, not with my cow. You see, we're going to have a lot of trouble carting off the change. When it was whole, it would pretty much transport itself. When the change has been made, it's very difficult to walk off with half the cow. Those of you who have ever earned a salary in the course of your livelihood might find it interesting to note that the word salary comes from the Latin word salarium. And back at the time of Christ, when he walked the earth, Roman soldiers were paid in salt, or they were paid in salarium, as the Latin word was. Now, if the Roman soldier wasn't worth his wage or his salary, he was not worth his salt. And we have the expression that we still use today. In Matthew 5:13, Jesus identified his followers and disciples and said, ye are the salt of the earth. Perhaps one of the reasons he called Christians salt was because a Christian who does the word and is not just a hearer only would hold back corruption. It appears we haven't been doing a very good job of that. Tobacco was used as money in colonial Virginia, which is not too far back in history, and geographically probably isn't too far away from where you live. Now, when the tobacco was grown, produced, it was then deposited in a warehouse, a tobacco bank. When you deposit something in a warehouse, you want a receipt for what it is that you deposit. That's called a warehouse receipt. In banking terminology, that's called a certificate of deposit. The certificate of deposit is not the deposit for which it is the mere certificate. So if I were to go downtown and I saw a gentleman that had a nice pair of boots for sale in the shop window, I might walk in and say, I'd like to buy that pair of boots. How much is it? Well, he says, that'll cost you 50 pounds of tobacco. Well, surely I didn't have to carry 50 pounds of tobacco in with me. I could have, and could have paid him on the spot. Or I could defer the payment by giving him an IOU, a promise to pay the tobacco, and he could go get the tobacco later on. If he didn't want the tobacco, he could pass the IOU on to someone else. But in each instance, the IOU is passing from hand to hand. The IOU, or the warehouse receipt for tobacco, is not being used as money. It's being used as if it were the money. And there's a big difference. The tobacco in the warehouse is still being used as money. The receipt is merely the substitute, surrogate, or the proxy token for the money that's on deposit. Likewise it was when we passed gold and silver certificates in the United States, and we'll cover those in another lesson. These pieces of paper passed merely as the proxy token or the substitute for the gold and the silver that was on deposit. It was the gold and silver being used as money the piece of paper was being used as if it were the money. Now, the United States once used gold and silver as money. The gold and silver was in coin form, and these particular coins that we see here have a nice harmonious relationship one to the other. These coins were all minted by the United States Treasury up until the year 1933. The Coinage Act of April 2nd, 1792, made provision for gold and silver to be used as money. And I'll read from Section 11 of the Coinage Act, which was passed April 2nd, 1792, which said, quote, that the proportional value of gold to silver in all coins, which shall by law be current as money within the United States. And it goes on. You notice that they didn't say that gold and silver were money, but rather that gold and silver were used as money. Our founding fathers apparently realized also that there's no such thing in and of itself that is a money any more than there is such a thing as a furniture. Now, if you're going to use something as money, then you're going to need a unit of measure. For example, if we were to use salt as money, how would we measure it or express it? Well, we'd probably measure it in ounces or pounds. Large enough sums, we'd measure it in tons. If we use lumber as money, how would we express it? Probably in board feet. If we use concrete as money, rather heavy substance, and not terribly valuable, but nevertheless, if we use concrete as money, how would we express it? Probably in cubic yards. If we used gold and silver as money, how would we express it? Well, some people might say we'd express it by weight. That's right. We probably wouldn't measure gold and silver in linear measure. We probably wouldn't measure it volumetrically. We'd probably measure it by weight. In fact, in looking at the Scriptures, in Genesis chapter 23, the first real estate transaction that I recall being recorded in the Scriptures, our forefather Abraham purchased some land, and beginning at we'll take verse 16, and Abraham hearkened unto Ephron, this was the individual from whom he bought the land, and Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver, which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, current money, with the merchant. The silver was weighed, and it was weighed in a unit of measure called shekel. Well, in the United States, we didn't choose to weigh our gold and silver in shekels, as our Israelite ancestors did of the Old Testament. We decided to weigh our gold and silver in a rather unique system. Now, in the United States, we have three systems of weight measurement. Most everyone's familiar with the avoirdupois system. Avoirdupois, or avoirdupois, however you choose to pronounce it, comes from the French, and it means to have weight. We have 16 ounces to the avoirdupois pound, or 7,000 grains to the pound. When using precious metals, or when weighing them in shavings, bar, bullion, and dust form, another system of weight measurement was conjured up, and that's called the troy system. And in the troy system, we have 12 ounces to the pound, or 5,760 grains. Now, a grain in the troy system and a grain in the avoirdupois system are the same. It's just that a troy pound is not as heavy a pound as the avoirdupois pound. When the gold and silver were put into coin form, as we did in the United States, we adopted here in the United States a third system of weight measurement, metric or decimal, called dollars and cents. These gold coins here were weighed in dollars. This coin way to the left weighed 25.8 grains of 90% pure gold. The coin to its right weighed 2.5 times as much. Now we'll just go up through this particular row of coinage, or through the row of coins, and we'll do it first off in the decimal, or rather the troy system. 25.8 grains. The next coin would weigh 2.5 times as much. It would weigh 2.5 times 25.8, whatever that works out to, I don't recall. The next coin weighed 5 times as much, and it certainly looks larger, so I guess we might accept that proposition. The next coin weighs 10 times as much. Well, this one's pretty easy. Even I can figure this one out. If the little coin here weighs 25.8 grains, this one would have to weigh 258 grains. Just simply move the decimal point to the right one place. And this coin weighed, when minted, exactly 10 times as much as this coin here. The coin weighed to the right weighed 20 times as much as this little coin. It weighed, therefore, twice as much as this coin here. Now, if Paul were going to sell me this video camera that he's using to video this presentation, and I said, Paul, how much do you want in gold for that video camera? Well, he might say, I want 258 grains of 90% pure gold minted by the United States Treasury up until 1933. Wow, that was quite a mouthful. Is there a shorter way of saying the same thing? Yes, I want a $10 weight of gold. Because in the decimal system, that's what that coin weighed. Let's go back to the little coin for just a moment. This coin weighed 25.8 grains. In the decimal system, it weighed $1. The coin to its right weighed 2.5 times as much. In the decimal system, how much did it weigh? Well, they told us right on the face of the coin. It says 2.5D. And it does weigh $2.50. You see, dollar is a unit of weight measurement. It's not a unit of psychological value. Most people say, well, how much is that worth? And they might say that a $2.50 gold coin might be worth $400. Can 2.5 gallons of milk be worth 400 gallons? If it can, then $2.50 can be worth $400. We're used to talking in circles. We're used to it so much that when we hear the truth, as the saying goes, truth is stranger than fiction. The reason truth is stranger than fiction is because we've accepted so much fiction as being truth that when we hear the truth, it seems stranger than fiction. This coin weighs 5 times as much as this little coin here, and in the decimal system, how much did it weigh? 5D. This coin weighed exactly 10 times as much as this little coin back here, and if you check any of your coin books, you'll find that that was a 258 grain coin, 0.900 fine, or 90% pure. And in the decimal system, the weight of the coin is stamped on it, as it obviously ought to be. It weighed $10. The coin to its right weighed 20 times as much as the little coin, or twice as much as the $10 weight. It weighs $20, just as it says. A little brochure here from the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. It's called U.S. Currency. In this little brochure on page 2 and 3, they tell us, quote, the United States became the first of the present community of nations to adopt the decimal system for its currency. The decimal system. The choice of the dollar as the principal unit of the United States currency was largely through the influences of 2 men, Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson, the first Secretary of State. In memoranda dated 1791, Jefferson wrote, quote, in fixing the unit of money, I'm going to stop there for just a moment. Can the unit of the money be the money for which it is the unit? Can a unit of United States currency be the currency for which it is the unit? Well, if it can, then a unit of concrete, which is a cubic yard, can be the concrete for which it is the unit. Did I say that right? There was a question that was posed to a banker back in Maine. We asked him this. What is a dollar? Most people tell us that a dollar is the money of the United States. When pressed further, the people will tell you that the dollar is the unit of the money, or the measure, if you will, of the money. Can the dollar be both the money and the measure of it? And the answer we got back from the president, I think he was at that time, of the First National Bank of Bar Harbor, was, quote, in my opinion, the dollar is both the money and the measure of it. That's a rather unique substance or unit of measure, whatever this dollar is. So we asked another question. Could we build a shopping center out of cubic yards of cubic yards by first putting out the forms, establishing how much concrete might go into the forms, and then instead of filling the forms with concrete, let's fill them with cubic yards. And then when they've all set up after maybe 7 or 8 days, I don't know what the cure time is for cubic yards, we take the forms down, and now we have a shopping plaza constructed out of cubic yards of cubic yards. What we've done is we've taken the unit of measure, or the expression of concrete, and we've simply used it to replace the concrete itself. In my opinion, a cubic yard is both the concrete and the measure of it. Well, he thought that was semantics. Strange how people have a way around logic. Anyway, in fixing the unit of money, they say, or Jefferson said, these circumstances are of principal importance. 1, that it be of convenient size to be applied as a measure to the common money transactions of life. 2, that its parts and multiples be in an easy proportion so as to facilitate the money arithmetic. 3, that the unit and its parts or divisions be so nearly of the value of some of the known coins as they may be of easy adoption by the people. As a model, the Spanish dollar seems to fulfill all these conditions. Now, most people think that a dollar is a tangible thing, and we will establish that it's not. In fact, we've already established by common sense that a dollar is not a thing. He goes on here on page 3, quote, the expediency of attending to the size of the money unit, Jefferson added, will be evident to anyone who will consider how inconvenient it would be to a manufacturer or merchant if instead of the yard for measuring cloth, either the inch or the mile had been made the unit of measure. End quote. What is Thomas Jefferson comparing dollars to or with? Well, he's comparing them to inches, miles, and yards. I have here a cup full of inches. Would anybody like to describe them? I have in my hand a handful of yards. Could anybody describe them? I have a suitcase full of miles. Could anybody describe them? Inches, yards, and miles are units of measure. You cannot see, smell, hear, taste, and or touch a unit of measure, such as an inch, yard, or a mile. He is equating here, in this particular article, dollar with units of measure, such as the inch, yard, and mile. If you cannot see, smell, hear, taste, or touch an inch, then you cannot see, smell, hear, taste, and or touch a dollar. A dollar is a unit of weight measurement, just like an ounce is a unit of weight measurement. In Contest for Sound Money, written by A. Barton Hepburn, and let's give a little bit of background on A. Barton Hepburn. He was the ex-comptroller of the currency, ex-superintendent of banking, Department of the State of New York, and vice president of Chase National Bank before it merged with Manhattan and became Chase Manhattan Bank. This was published by Macmillan Company, 1903. And in the back of this particular book, in one of the appendices, Mr. Hepburn has a copy of the letter from Mr. Jefferson to a Colonel Hamilton. The date, February 1792. And this was taken from Jefferson's Works, Volume 3, page 330. This particular page I'm reading is page 624, and listen to what Jefferson says to Hamilton. And remember now that both Jefferson and Hamilton are responsible for the United States adopting the decimal or metric system to weigh its coins. And there's hardly anyone in America today that realizes that we weighed our gold and silver coins in a decimal or metric system called dollars and cents. Quote, with respect to the dollar, it must be admitted by all the world that there is great uncertainty in the meaning of the term. And therefore all the world will have justified Congress for their first act of removing the uncertainty by declaring what they understand by the term. But the certain uncertainty once removed exists no longer, and I very much doubt a right now to change the value and especially to lessen it. It would lead to so easy a mode of paying off their debts. Should it be thought, however, that Congress may reduce the value of the dollar, and by the word value here he means the weight and purity, not the psychological value. Value walks in two different spectrums. in an objective and a subjective sense, and we'll cover that in a later part of this lesson. I should be for adopting for our unit, instead of the dollar, either 1 ounce of pure silver or 1 ounce of standard silver, so as to keep the unit of money a part of the system of measures, weights, and coins. Oh, how much easier it would have been if the United States First Congress had adopted the troy or the avoirdupois system to weigh our gold and silver. But they chose the decimal system instead, and that posed a great deal of confusion. Let's take a peek again at these gold coins. We notice this nice harmonious relationship. We have just weights and measures, just as the Bible commands. In fact, in the Scriptures, we're told in, I'll take a peek at Leviticus chapter 19, I think it is. Leviticus 19, 35 and 36, you shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. It looks like we have just weights and measures. In fact, if you check your coin books, you'll find that when these coins were first minted, the accuracy of the coinage was held to within 3 places to the right of the decimal. That's very accurate coinage. If we were to drag a spike across one of these coins, we'd be guilty of an offense. Most people would say, yes, you have defaced the coin. Well, that's not actually what the offense is called. If you go into a men's room and you write a dirty joke or something on the wall, you've defaced the wall. If you drag a spike or something across the coin, or if you clip the coin, defacing is not the crime. Debasing is the crime. Because you've reduced the bargain for consideration. You've removed some of the bargain for gold or silver in the coin, whichever the coin happens to be. Now, there was a penalty if you did that. And it was a rather stiff penalty. Section 19, and there were only 20 sections in the Coinage Act of April 2nd, 1792, but Section 19 prescribed the penalty for debasing the coins. And it says here, quote, and I'll read it in part, that if any of the gold or silver coins which shall be struck or coined at the said mint shall be debased or made worse as to the proportion of fine gold or fine silver therein contained, or shall be of less weight or value than the same ought to be, every such officer or person who shall commit any or either of the said offenses shall be deemed guilty of felony and shall suffer death. See, our ancestors took the law of just weights and measures fairly seriously, at least insofar as they seem to have understood it. We not only use gold as money in the United States, but we also used silver. In fact, if you're familiar with the United States Constitution, at Article 1, Section 10, in Paragraph 1, we read in part that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin, a tender and payment of debts. If you're going to pay your debts, you're going to be using something as money. And money pays debts. It doesn't merely defer the debts or discharge the debts in equity, as we will be covering later on. And it said gold or silver coin. It didn't say gold and silver certificates or Federal Reserve notes or any other types of scrip. If we start here at the right this time, most everyone is familiar with, or perhaps has seen, these large coins. Most everyone calls those silver dollars. This is an erroneous term. The coin is not a silver dollar. The coin weighed $1 in the metric system. The coin was made out of silver, and it weighed $1. That was, more appropriately or correctly called, a $1 weight of silver, or a dollar of silver, if you will. The coin to its left weighed very close to half of what the $1 coin weighed. Therefore, this coin, which is made out of silver, weighs half a dollar, just as it says, half dollar. The coin to its left weighs half as much as the half dollar weight of silver, so this coin weighs a $0.25 of silver. The coin to its left weighs 1/10 as much as the dollar coin, or fairly closely to 1/10. There's a little bit of inaccuracy in the silver system, as you'll find out here in a moment, if I don't forget to tell you about it. This coin weighs 1/10 of a dollar, or it weighs simply 1 dime. It's not a silver dime, it's a dime weight of silver. The coin to its left, it's kind of a rare bird. These were minted during the mid-1800s. It was made out of silver also, equal to 5 cents. And since it weighs half as much as the dime weight of silver, it must obviously weigh a half dime, and that's exactly what it says on its face, half dime. Now don't call it a nickel because it's not made out of nickel. Our nickel coins, in fact, are made out of 25% nickel and 75% copper. It probably ought to be called a copper more than they ought to be called a nickel. Within the silver system, we seem to have also just weights and measures, but the just weights and measures are not absolutely accurate. Now, for those who are statutorily inclined, if you look in some of your older statute books, you'll find in, I believe it's Title 12, United States Code, Section 459 and 460, that the United States had prescribed, up until a few years ago, a maximum single lawful debt that could be paid in silver coins. The silver coins starting at 50 cents and smaller. The subsidiary coins, or these minor silver coins, or whatever you want to call them, had a maximum single lawful debt limit of $10. Over $10, you could be compelled, back in the old days, to go to the cartwheel, the $1 weight of silver, or to the gold coins. Why? Well, I surmise that it's because 2 halves, 4 quarters, and 10 dimes don't contain quite as much silver as the $1 weight of silver. You won't be able to tell by just holding them in your hands, but if you have a set of balance scales, you will quickly determine that a stack of these don't add up to a stack of those if you have them in the proper proportion. In other words, 20 of these will not equal the weight of 10 of those. In fact, 2 halves will equal 0.72 ounce of silver. 4 quarters will give you 0.72 ounce of silver, and 10 dimes will give you 0.72 ounce of silver. The cartwheel over here, the $1 weight of silver, is 0.77 ounce. So apparently they felt that you were going to be defrauded of too much of your bargain for consideration, and therefore over $10 you could be compelled to go to the $1 coin. So there was a little bit of an error that was, for some reason or other, placed in the silver system. I don't think it was necessary, because it seems to me the Canadian silver, dime, quarter, half, and $1 weights that they had a few years ago were in perfect harmony, just as our gold coins are in perfect harmony one with the other. The Canadian coins, however, don't have the same purity. They were, I think, 0.800 fine. United States coins were 0.900 fine. Now, if you compare the gold and the silver coins in juxtaposition, hope you can comprehend this rather densely populated chart. These coins here on the left are our gold coins that we had looked at a little bit earlier. This is the $1 weight, the 2.5, the 5, the 10, and the $20 weight of gold. Don't call this a gold dollar. Dollars are not made out of gold, but gold can weigh a dollar. It's just improper terminology and very confusing. This is the $1 weight of silver, the half, quarter, dime weight, half dime weight of silver, and these are our modern-day copper-nickel slugs, and we'll get to those in a little while. You notice, however, that there's a considerable difference between the silver coin and the gold coin. The silver coin is considerably heavier than the gold coin, yet both of these coins weigh or are expressed as $1. Why did they do that? Well, in the open market, Congress found that gold and silver were trading in the order of 15 or 16 to 1, and that it took 16 or 15 times as much silver to acquire the same product as if you had been using gold. So they decided to violate, I don't think they did this intentionally, I think it was an oversight, but they ended up violating the law of just weights and measures by establishing a decimal system to weigh or measure silver and another decimal system to weigh or measure gold. Now I want to take you back to the Coinage Act for just a moment. Section 20. Just so that you'll understand thoroughly that dollars are not things, any more than ounces and inches are things, and that the money, which was the gold and silver, was merely expressed in dollars or units. Section 20 of the Coinage Act of April 2nd, 1792, which, by the way, Liberty and the American Eagle, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, tells us on page 2, the Coinage Act of 1792 is still the law. So don't feel as though we're reading something that is archaic and has been rendered obsolete or rendered unlawful, I should say. It may be obsolete, but it's not unlawful. It's obsolete only because we're not observing it. Section 20. Quote, that the money of account of the United States shall be expressed in dollars or units. Let's stop there for just a moment. If the money, or the money of account, whatever it is that you're using as money, is expressed in dollars or units, can the dollars or the units be the money? No. Dollars are not money. Units are not money. Dollars or units merely express the money that you're using. Well, what was the money we were using? The Coinage Act specified in Section 11, quote, that the proportional value of gold to silver in all coins, which shall by law be current as money within the United States, and so forth. What was money? Gold and silver were used as money. Confirmation, Section 16 of the same Coinage Act, which said, quote, that all the gold and silver coins shall be a lawful tender in all payments whatsoever. Well, what you're using as lawful tender in payment of debts is what you're using as money, and that was gold and silver. So let's go back to Section 20 again. That the money of account of the United States shall be expressed in dollars or units, dimes or tenths, cents or hundredths, and mills or thousandths, a dime being a tenth part of a dollar, and so on. And furthermore, that all accounts in public offices and all proceedings in the courts of the United States shall be kept and had in conformity to this regulation, end quote. There isn't a public office or a proceeding in any court that is now kept and had in conformity with the law. Section 20 of the Coinage Act was later on recodified as Title 31, United States Code, Section 371, which read verbatim, the money of account of the United States shall be expressed in dollars or units, dimes, tenths, cents, hundreds, mills, thousands, etc., and that all proceedings in the courts and so forth should be kept and had in conformity with this regulation. A few people in the Patriot Freedom Movement posed questions concerning Title 31, United States Code 371, so Congress got its little pea brains together and decided to rewrite Title 31. And Section 371 is now found as Section 5101, which gives you an indication as to how much of a job they did on Title 31. Title 12 and Title 31, out of all of the 50 titles, deal with banking and finance. They rewrote them, trying to duck the question when people asked, what is the money of account of the United States? So it now reads that the money of the United States is expressed in dollars. Fine, I'll bite. What is the money that Congress is collecting, spending, or wasting that's expressed in dollars? And if any congressman can identify what it is, I'll give each congressman 100 pounds of it absolutely free. Anyway, let's go back to our posting. As you can see, we have a little bit of disharmony between the $1 weight of gold and the $1 weight of silver. Congress decided that they would make these coins of different sizes so that if a person owed a tax or were to pay a particular fee to the government didn't care whether you paid $1 of gold or $1 of silver. Therefore, all they had to tell you was that Paul, Bill, Jane, Sally, Dick, or whoever you are, you owe us $1. And they didn't care if you paid them a little tiny $1 weight of gold or a $1 weight of silver. So you see, in order to make accurate delivery of any particular substance, you need 3 elements or 3 indicia. Indicia is just a fancy word for element. You need to know the quantity symbol, such as the number 1, 5, 10, or 20. You need the unit of measure, such as gallons, pounds, feet, ounces, or dollars. And you need to identify the entity or the substance that you're going to deliver or receive. For example, if you go to a butcher shop and you tell the butcher that you'd like to have 5 pounds. And would you slice it real thin for me, please, because it improves the flavor. The butcher is going to be standing there twiddling his thumbs for a little while, wondering what you want 5 pounds of. You see, you've only identified the quantity symbol, 5, and the unit of measure, pounds, but you haven't told him what you want 5 pounds of. When you get around to telling him what it is, you may be able to get some of it. Let's suppose it's beef bologna, and let's say it's on sale for $1 a pound. Please excuse my expression, buck, but we passed the buck in America, but we don't have any dollars of anything that seem to be circulating, at least for public purposes. So we'll use the word buck. We go to the register at the front of the store, and the girl at the register says, well, that'll be $5, please. How many indicia or elements has she employed? 2. The quantity symbol, 5. The unit of measure, $. But she hasn't identified what she wants $5 off. Now, I'll give her 5 pounds of the money absolutely free if she can identify what it is. And then I'll give her $5 of it to make sure that the store is satisfied. No response. We then jump in our car and drive down to the gas station, and we tell the attendant there we'd like to have 10 gallons. Well, 10 gallons of what? Regular, high test. In fact, I guess it's all becoming the same thing in America now. They're kind of forcing us into one grade of fuel. Or diesel. No, I want 10 gallons of gallons. You've only used 2 elements. Well, Congress forced us into using, or induced us into using, but 2 elements when they made these coins of different size and different weights, and yet declared that they both, in essence, were worth, psychologically, the same amount. So I'll give you another illustration that will clarify this for you. Supposing I were operating a grocery store, and I were selling salt and sugar, similar appearing substances, but sugar being a more valuable substance. We have little bitty bags of sugar that weigh 1 pound, and we have great big bags of salt that claim to weigh 1 pound. And let's suppose Helen over here buys a bag of salt, and Fred over here gets a bag of sugar. Helen brings her salt to the register. She's got a great big bag, and it says 1 pound. Fred brings the sugar. Hope I didn't get those people mixed up. And he says, what gives here, Bruce? I got a little bitty bag, and it says 1 pound. Well, Fred, don't you know? Sugar is more valuable than salt. And therefore, in our store, a pound of sugar is only 1 ounce. But a pound of salt is 16 ounces. Do you have any idea how confusing it would be to go to a supermarket that had all the objects weighed in the same unit of measure, but the unit of measure was different to accommodate the psychological value? I don't think I could tolerate it. But for generations we've been dealing in just that type of confusion in our monetary system, and is it any wonder that economists can't seem to figure out how to define even the simple word M-O-N-E-Y? I would submit that it was because we violated the law of Scripture. And if you happen to have a Bible with you, you might want to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25 for our second reference on just weights and measures. Deuteronomy chapter 25, and we'll start at verse 13. Read verse 14 and 15. Thou shalt not have in thy bag diverse weights, a great and a small. Thou shalt not have in thine house diverse measures, a great and a small. But thou shalt have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure shalt thou have, that thy days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord, or Yahweh thy God, giveth thee. You see, God commands us to perfection in weights and measures. Not almost perfection, like when you go down to get a 2x4 and it turns out to be 1.5 by 3.5. The lumber companies have been doing the same thing, but they haven't caught up with the bankers. The bankers are way ahead of them. But they're trying. In fact, even a 4x8 sheet of plywood is no longer the same thickness that it claims to be. Seems to me they've shaved off, a 32nd off plywood now. So they're progressing. This is the modern way. So we have a great deal of confusion. Once again, by making these coins different sizes, Congress eliminated the necessity to identify what you wanted a dollar of. They simply said you owe us $1 or $5 or $10 or whatever it might have been. And therefore, for generations, our people spoke in terms of how many dollars they earned, how many dollars they spent, how many dollars they owed. But they never identified how many dollars of what they spent or earned or owed. Having done that for generation after generation, in around 1933 it was decided that, heck, since the people aren't talking about dollar weights of gold and so forth, why don't we see if we can take away the gold from the people and see if they'll miss it? The public didn't seem to mind because the public had plenty of dollars and they also had some silver. In 1965, the silver was taken away. The public didn't seem to mind. Well, we have more dollars now than we ever did. But we don't have any dollars of anything. We're pouring our foundations or our forms full of cubic yards, but no concrete. The expression dollar conjures up in most people's mind a tangible thing. If I were to ask you for $1, prior to this lesson at least, you probably would have reached into your pocket and handed me a $1 Federal Reserve note. Most people believe that $1 is a piece of paper. Let's see if we can employ a little bit of common sense. That common sense that Voltaire said was not too common. If a tuna is a fish, wouldn't 100 tuna have to be 100 fish? If a Ford is an automobile, wouldn't 100 Fords have to be 100 automobiles? If a lime is a piece of fruit, wouldn't 100 limes have to be 100 pieces of fruit? If $1 was a piece of paper, wouldn't $100 have to be 100 pieces of paper? How could one piece of paper be 100 of anything? While in the Bahamas several years ago, I came up against a businessman. He had retired from a franchise food service business back in Massachusetts, and he had a $50 bill in his hand. And I said to him, you know, that's not $50. He says, everybody knows that's $50. Well, I said, I just said that it wasn't $50, so then apparently and obviously not everyone knows that. He began to grow beet red. So we proposed a little bit of a simple illustration. Sir, if a tuna was a fish, wouldn't 50 tuna have to be 50 fish? His answer was, quote, not necessarily. Why do you suppose he gave such an asinine answer? Because he could anticipate the second question. And in no way was he going to let Bruce McCarthy make a fool out of him on question number 2. So he decided to beat me to it and make a fool of himself on question number 1. Well, to each his own. If land was used as money, it would probably be expressed in the United States in acres. A deed written on paper against the land would also be expressed in acres. For certainly deeds are not denominated or expressed in ounces or gallons. If milk was used as money, it would be expressed in quarts. And a receipt for milk would also be expressed in quarts. If gold and silver were used as money and weighed in the decimal or metric system, then the receipts for gold and silver would also be expressed or denominated in the same units of measure. What we have here are poor imitations of receipts that we once used for the gold and the silver that were on deposit in the United States Treasury or in Federal Reserve banks or other types of depository institutions. Let's say, for example, the cameraman, Paul here, has 1 acre of land, and I have 100 acres of land. I said, Paul, I'd like to see your deed. And he brings it to me, and we put it down on the table, and I put my deed right down beside it, and I said, Paul, I have a great revelation. What's that? The deeds are exactly the same size, 8.5 by 11. You stupid fool. Well, of course they're the same size, because the deed is not the land. That's right. This is a deed or a claim check, a receipt or a note for a quantity of money. And if a deed is not the land, then a note is not the money. Therefore, the deeds to money or the notes or receipts for money don't have to be any larger, even though they carry larger denominations. The note is not the money. We have here a $1 quantity of money that may be someplace. It either is there or it's someplace else, or it doesn't exist. We have a deed or a claim check to a $100 quantity of money. It's either there. Well, no, I don't think it's there. Maybe it's someplace else, or maybe it doesn't exist. I wonder which it is. In the United States, we don't have a monetary system. A monetary system would presuppose that we're using something as money. What we have is a credit system, where the notes that we pass from hand to hand represent a quantity of money that doesn't actually exist, either in hand or in the local bank, a Federal Reserve Bank, or even in the United States Treasury. We'll cover that in the next lesson. We also use tokens. One of the tokens that we use, or several of the tokens, I should say, are copper nickel. Many of you are familiar with the Susan B. Agony Super Quarter. There's 11 sides, and I guess in Bible numerics, I'm not much of a student on Bible numerics, but I understand the number 11 is the number of confusion. Here we have a 50-cent piece, also made out of copper nickel. I'm sure that most of you realize that there is no silver in any of our coinage any longer, and there hasn't been since 1965. I was surprised to meet an airline pilot not too long ago. We were riding together on the flight deck of a Lockheed 1011, and he told me that he thought that we still had some silver in our coins. He knew that some of it had been taken out, but he had no idea that all of it had been taken out. Now, this is a very intelligent individual. He was a former Navy pilot. He used to fly off aircraft carriers, I think F-14 Tomcats or something like that. Had a college degree of some sort, and a very intelligent man. Yet for some reason, he was able to go all the way through college and even become a naval aviator and an airline pilot subsequent to that, and still not know that the silver had been taken out of his coinage. I would submit that there is something very much flawed with our educational system to have allowed him to pass through without having acquired that little bit of knowledge. This coin here, the 1-cent coin, used to be made out of copper and zinc. In fact, the coins used to be, up until about 1982, 95% copper and 5% zinc. Not so any longer. In fact, some of you may have noticed that the pennies are a little bit lighter than they used to be. I have a little brochure here. It's called Penny Points, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. And they tell us in here, quote, copper speculators are also in for a letdown. Hear that, speculators? Federal Reserve's after you, too. In 1982, the Mint introduced a penny that is 97.6% zinc and only 2.4% copper. By comparison, copper pennies are 95% copper and 5% zinc. The copper-plated zinc penny is identical in size and appearance to its copper counterpart, but the current cent is 19% lighter. A 5,000-piece bag of copper pennies weighs 34 pounds, whereas a bag of zinc alloy pennies tips the scales at 28 pounds. The zinc pennies are also less expensive to mint. Based on 1982 figures, a zinc penny cost 0.6 of a cent to manufacture, compared to 0.8 of a cent for a copper coin. Well, I suppose that's what it might cost if you and I were doing it, but it doesn't cost the Treasury or the Federal Reserve anything to get pennies. They get them for free, as we will establish a little bit later on. Anyway, this coin here used to be made out of 95% copper and 5% zinc. The coin we call a nickel is made out of 25% nickel and 75% copper, and it's all mixed together. The dime, quarter, half, and Susan B. Agony super quarter are all made out of a clad process. The core of the coin is 100% copper, and the surface of the coin is made out of 25% nickel and 75% copper. The question we might ask is, why is it that the dime coin, which is made out of copper nickel, is worth twice as much as the nickel coin and is yet obviously a much smaller coin? Why is it that the Susan B. Agony super quarter, considerably smaller than the half-dollar coin, is worth twice as much yet contains far less of the same metal? Well, it reminds me of when my wife and I were leaving the state of Maine a couple of years ago on a trip, and the toll was $1.55. My wife handed me a Susan B., a Kennedy half, and 5 of the new zinc pennies, which added to $1.55. As we approached the toll booth and then handed it to the agent, the man was probably in his mid-50s, maybe a little bit later, he said, "That's $1.55. "Yes, sir." "Is it $1.55? "Yes, sir." He grabbed the large coin. He says, "What is this, $1?" I said, "No, sir, that's the half-dollar coin. The dollar is the small coin." You know, when he read the superscription on those coins, he believed. You see, we have a system of faith. The Federal Reserve tells us in the hats the Federal Reserve wears on page 4, the real backing for the nation's money is faith. If you believe that you have twice as much of the money there as you do here, then you have exhibited and exerted a fair amount of faith. Do you know the Federal Reserve as your personal savior? You can, you know. You can accept Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, as your personal savior. Because that is where we put most of our faith today. Purely confidence. Let's take a break.